El Perro del Ganadero Desapareció dos Noches y Regreso con una mujer Apache encadenada. The sun had just begun to dip behind the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the sprawling ranch. It was a calm evening, the kind where the wind whispered through the tall grass, and the only sounds were the distant calls of birds returning to their nests and the low hum of insects in the air. On this peaceful evening, Don Guillermo stood near the edge of the corral, his weathered face squinting into the fading light as he looked over his herd of cattle. It had been a long, tiring day. He had worked the land with his hands, repairing fences and making sure the animals had enough water. The work never stopped on a ranch, and Don Guillermo was used to it. He had been running this ranch for over 20 years, and in that time he had built a life that was both simple and rewarding. His wife Maria and their 2 children, Isabel and Diego, were waiting for him inside the small farmhouse, preparing the evening meal. It was a good life, and Don Guillermo was content. But there was one companion who made his days easier and his nights more secure. That companion was Chico, his loyal dog. Chico was a large, scruffy sheepdog with shaggy fur that had turned a little gray around the muzzle in recent years. He had been with Don Guillermo since he was just a pup, and over the years, they had developed a bond that went beyond owner and pet. Chico was more than just a dog. He was a trusted helper on the ranch. Every morning when the sun rose, Chico would be by Don Guillermo's side, ready to round up the cattle, chase away any coyotes, and guard the property. He knew the land as well as Don Guillermo did, and the 2 of them had become a well-oiled team. That evening, however, something was different. Don Guillermo had noticed that Chico had been acting strangely for the past few days. The dog, who usually followed him everywhere without question, had begun to wander off on his own, disappearing for hours at a time. At first, Don Guillermo thought it was just a passing mood. After all, dogs sometimes need their space. But now, on this particular evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of purple and the stars began to appear overhead, Chico had wandered off once again, and this time, he hadn't returned. Don Guillermo wasn't too worried at first. The dog had disappeared for longer stretches of time before. There were plenty of coyotes and wild animals in the area, and it was not uncommon for Chico to chase after one or to explore the surrounding hills. But as the minutes turned into hours, a sense of unease began to settle in. The ranch was isolated, far from the nearest town, and the land around them was wild and untamed. Don Guillermo knew that, without Chico, he would be at a disadvantage. He had no way of knowing what dangers could be lurking nearby. He called out into the growing darkness. "Chico," he shouted, his voice strong but laced with the hint of concern. There was no answer. He stood there for a moment, listening, hoping to hear the familiar sound of the dog's barking or the jingle of his collar. But the night was silent, save for the rustling of the wind through the trees and the soft lowing of the cattle in the distance. Don Guillermo frowned, his brow furrowing as he scanned the darkening horizon. Something wasn't right. After a few minutes of waiting, he decided to go after him. He grabbed his lantern, tied his boots tightly, and set off in the direction where he had last seen the dog. The ranch was large, and the land stretched out in every direction, but Don Guillermo knew it well. He had walked every inch of it many times before. Still, the thought of going out alone at night made him uneasy. He called out for Chico again, his voice louder this time. His lantern light flickered as he walked, casting strange shadows on the rocks and bushes around him. The wind had picked up, and the air was beginning to cool. As he climbed a small rise in the land, he thought he heard something, a faint rustle in the bushes. His heart leapt in his chest as he hurried toward the sound, hoping that it was Chico returning. But when he reached the bushes, there was no sign of the dog. The land was quiet once more. Don Guillermo stood still for a moment, his breath steadying. Something was wrong. Chico would never have wandered this far on his own. The rancher turned in a slow circle, his eyes scanning the hills and valleys, looking for any sign of his faithful companion. but all he saw were the vast stretches of land that seemed to go on forever, bathed in the eerie light of the lantern. It was then that a deep feeling of dread settled over him. His dog, his loyal Chico, had never stayed away this long. The rancher's thoughts raced. Was there something out there, something dangerous? Had Chico gotten himself into trouble? Was he hurt? Don Guillermo stood there for a long moment, staring into the night. The only sound was the wind howling through the trees. He had to find the dog. He couldn't rest until he did. The next morning came too soon. Don Guillermo had spent hours walking the hills, calling for Chico, but there was still no sign of him. He had searched all through the night, his body growing tired, but the worry in his heart kept him moving. By dawn, he returned to the farmhouse to find Maria already awake, preparing breakfast. "Any sign of him?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. "No," Don Guillermo replied, his face drawn and tired. "Nothing. I've searched everywhere." It wasn't just the dog's disappearance that troubled him. It was the feeling that something was wrong, that something had happened to Chico. He couldn't shake the feeling that his dog wasn't just lost. He had been taken. The day passed slowly. Don Guillermo spent the morning walking the ranch once more, hoping to find any sign of the dog, his tracks, a broken branch, anything. But there was nothing. He felt more and more uneasy with each passing hour. The wind had died down and the day was still, too still. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. That night, just as he had the night before, Don Guillermo called out for Chico, but there was still no answer. The ranch felt emptier than ever without the dog. The house, which had always been filled with the sound of Chico's paws on the floor and his low bark when someone approached, was quiet. It felt as though something was missing, something important. But then, just as Don Guillermo was about to give up for the night, something unexpected happened. A noise came from the direction of the stable, a low growl, followed by the sound of paws hitting the ground. Don Guillermo's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Had Chico returned? He grabbed his lantern once more and hurried outside, his feet crunching on the gravel path. When he reached the stable, the lantern light flickered across the doorway, revealing a figure, a shadow moving just inside. And then he saw it, Chico. But there was something strange about the way the dog was moving. His fur was matted with dirt, his eyes wide with fear. And most startling of all, there was something, or rather someone following him. A figure bound in chains. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft silver glow over the ranch. The night air had cooled and the wind had become quieter, almost as if it was waiting for something to happen. Don Guillermo stood frozen in place, his heart pounding as he watched the familiar, yet strange, scene unfold before him. There, in the dim light of his lantern, stood Chico, his loyal sheepdog, but something was off. The dog's fur, usually so thick and well-groomed, was matted with dirt and leaves, his paws caked in the dust of the long, hard journey he must have taken. The usually bright spark in his eyes was dull, his body weary as if he had been through something intense. He was limping slightly, favoring one of his legs. Don Guillermo's heart sank. What had happened to him? Chico's usual barks of excitement were replaced by a low, strained whine. The dog's tail, usually wagging enthusiastically when he was near his owner, hung limply between his legs. His usual confident stance was now crouched, almost as if he were ashamed or frightened. But it wasn't just Chico who caught Don Guillermo's attention. There, trailing behind the dog, was a figure, someone who should not have been there. The figure was a woman, but not just any woman. She was shackled at the wrists and ankles, her clothes ragged and torn, as though she had been through days, if not weeks, of hardship. Her face was pale and streaked with dirt, her long black hair tangled in knots. She was thin, far too thin, and as she stepped forward, her legs seemed unsteady, like she could barely keep herself upright. Don Guillermo's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment he stood rooted to the ground, unable to move. The air around him felt thick and his thoughts raced. Who was she? Why was she chained? Where had she come from? Chico took a few more cautious steps toward Don Guillermo, still limping but clearly relieved to be home. He looked up at his owner with tired eyes as though seeking comfort. The dog let out a soft whine and stopped in front of Don Guillermo, almost as though he were offering up the woman as if she were a gift, or perhaps a message. Don Guillermo's mind was spinning. He stepped forward, his lantern casting long shadows on the ground as he approached the two. The woman's eyes flicked toward him, filled with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. She took a small step back, as though she didn't trust him, her chains rattling with the movement. But she did not speak. She simply stood there, her body tense, her eyes darting around as if she feared something more than just the man standing before her. Don Guillermo could not ignore the fact that the woman had been brought here by his dog, Chico. Had the dog found her somewhere out there in the wild? But why was she chained, and why did she look so frightened? He could not fathom the answer, but his curiosity and concern pushed him to act. "Chico," he murmured softly, kneeling down to the dog's level. He gently placed his hand on the dog's head, feeling the familiar warmth of his fur beneath his fingers. Chico gave a soft groan of relief, leaning into Don Guillermo's touch, his tired eyes closing for a moment as if savoring the moment of safety. Don Guillermo looked back at the woman. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm, as if trying to assure her that she was no longer in danger. But the woman did not respond. Instead, she took another hesitant step back, glancing toward the horizon as if worried about something. Her breathing was shallow and her body trembled. She had clearly been through something terrible, and yet there was an undeniable strength in her eyes, something that spoke of survival, of resilience. Don Guillermo straightened up, his mind racing. He couldn't just leave her standing here, chained and frightened. She was in no condition to be left alone out in the open, and from the way she had been brought to him by Chico, it was clear that she had nowhere else to go. "Come with me," Don Guillermo said gently, offering his hand to the woman. He didn't know where she came from or what had happened to her, but he couldn't turn his back on someone in need. Not like this. At first, the woman flinched at his outstretched hand. She glanced nervously around again, her eyes flashing with fear. She seemed to be caught between a desire to trust him and an instinct to flee. But then, after a long, tense moment, she took a deep breath and slowly, cautiously, moved toward him. Her movement was hesitant, as if every step she took was a battle in itself. She was obviously exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Don Guillermo could see that. Her frame was thin, her shoulders slumped with the weight of the chains that bound her. There was dirt on her face, and her clothes, if they could even be called that, were torn and faded, barely hanging on to her frail body. As they moved toward the house, Don Guillermo kept his lantern held high, the flickering light guiding their way through the darkness. The night seemed to press in on them from all sides, but for the first time in a long while, Don Guillermo felt the weight of something greater than his own concerns. He felt the weight of responsibility. It was clear that the woman was a stranger to him, but that didn't matter. She needed help, and that was enough for him. When they reached the barn, Don Guillermo guided the woman inside, where it was warmer. He moved toward the small table in the corner, where he kept a few basic tools and supplies. With careful hands, he began to work on unshackling her, the metal chains clinking softly as he removed them from her wrists and ankles. The woman winced slightly as the chains were removed, her skin raw from the constant pressure, but she didn't say a word. As the last of the chains fell to the ground, Don Guillermo placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure how true that really was. The fear in her eyes hadn't completely disappeared. There was still something lurking beneath the surface, something that told him that her journey was far from over. But for now, she was no longer alone. The woman sat down heavily on the bench in the corner of the barn, her body shaking with exhaustion. She didn't speak. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her knees and rested her head against the wall, closing her eyes as if the simple act of sitting in peace for the first time in days, or maybe even weeks, was all she could handle. Don Guillermo stood for a moment, watching her, unsure of what to do next. He wanted to know who she was, where she had come from, and why she had been shackled in the first place. But he also knew that now wasn't the time to ask. She needed rest, food, and perhaps a bit of warmth before any questions could be answered. He turned toward the door of the barn. It was then that his wife, Maria, appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with concern. She had heard the commotion and was looking for him. When she saw the woman sitting in the corner, her eyes widened in surprise. "Guillermo," Maria said, her voice low. "What happened?" "But she needs help, and I'm going to give it to her. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what's going on." The ranch, which had once felt like a quiet sanctuary, now seemed more like a place of suspense. The woman, whom Don Guillermo had helped into the barn, had not yet spoken much. She still seemed distant, lost in her own thoughts, but the rancher had made it clear that she was safe here, for now. Don Guillermo, ever the caretaker, did what he could to ensure she was comfortable. He brought her food and water, but the woman rarely touched either. Her eyes would flicker to the food as if she were tempted, but her mind seemed far away. Sometimes, when the sun was low in the sky, Don Guillermo would hear her crying softly in the corner of the barn, the sound muffled and filled with sorrow. It tore at his heart, but he knew better than to press her too quickly. She needed time to heal, both physically and emotionally. The trauma of whatever she had gone through had left deep scars that would take more than just a meal or a warm bed to erase. Maria, too, was kind to the woman. She offered gentle words and comforting smiles, but she understood, like Don Guillermo, that no real progress would come until the woman was ready to speak. Still, she did what she could to ease the silence. Every evening she would bring a small pot of stew and sit by the barn door, talking softly about the day's chores, the weather, the animals, anything to help the woman feel less isolated. Maria's warmth, her calm and patient nature, seemed to have a soothing effect, but the woman remained distant. It wasn't until the fourth evening after her arrival that the woman finally spoke. It was late, and the air had cooled after a long, sweltering day. The moon shone brightly, casting a pale light across the fields as Don Guillermo walked toward the barn. He had just finished the evening's work with the cattle, and his mind was still spinning with questions about the woman. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had Chico brought her to him? When Don Guillermo entered the barn, he was surprised to find the woman sitting on the low wooden bench, her head down, her long black hair hanging in front of her face. She was holding a small bowl of stew in her hands, but it seemed as if she was merely holding it for comfort rather than eating it. Her fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the bowl, but for the first time she looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that took him by surprise. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice soft but clear, the words carrying an unmistakable sadness. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need to thank me," he said gently. "You're safe here, that's all that matters." After a long moment of silence, the woman set the bowl down on the floor beside her. She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength, before looking up at Don Guillermo again. This time her eyes were filled with something more than just sorrow. There was a quiet resolve in them, as though she had made a decision. "My name is Ayani," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm Apache." It sounded like a truth that carried history and pain. Don Guillermo nodded slowly, acknowledging her words but unsure of how to respond. "I understand," he said quietly, offering a small smile of reassurance. He wanted to show her that he meant no harm, that she could trust him, but the situation was far from simple. Ayani looked away for a moment, her eyes closing as if the weight of her past was too much to bear. She took another deep breath before continuing. "I was captured," she said softly, by men who were working for the settlers. They came in the night, killed my people, took me." Her voice trembled with emotion, but she pushed on. "They chained me, made me work for them. They told me I was to be a prisoner, that I would never see my people again. They left me when their mission failed, left me in the wilderness." Her body had not been the only thing shackled, her heart and mind had been locked away as well. "I ran," Yanni continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I ran as far as I could, but the wilderness it's not kind. I was lost, starving, and then I saw your dog. Maybe he knew I was lost too. I was on the brink of giving up when he found me. He didn't leave me, didn't bark at me like other dogs would have. He just stayed with me. Was that why he had brought her to the ranch? It seemed like a strange twist of fate, yet it felt right, as though Chico had played a role in something much bigger than just a rescue. Ayani's voice grew quieter as she continued. I didn't know what to do, I thought. I was going to die there, alone, but your dog, he wouldn't leave. He stayed with me even when I was so weak. He brought me here to you. I promise. I don't know how to be safe anymore, Ayani whispered, the words full of a grief that went beyond her circumstances. Everything I knew is gone. My people, my family, they're gone, and I don't know how to live in a world that doesn't want me. He couldn't undo what had been done to her, couldn't bring back the people she had lost. But he knew one thing, she didn't have to face this alone. We'll help you, he said firmly, looking her in the eyes. You don't have to do this alone. We'll help you find your way. We'll make sure you're safe. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift off her shoulders, just enough to let her believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond the fear and the pain. But there was still much to be done. The road ahead was uncertain, and Don Guillermo knew that the struggle wasn't over. Not yet. But in that moment, the woman had taken the first step toward healing, and that was enough. The days at the ranch after Ayani's arrival were filled with quiet tension. The woman, though recovering physically, remained emotionally distant. She was still haunted by the memories of what had happened to her. Yet, there was something different in her eyes now, something hopeful, as if the gentle care she received was slowly starting to heal her wounds. Don Guillermo could see the change, but he also knew that this fragile peace couldn't last forever. The small ranch, nestled in the quiet hills, had always been a place of refuge. Don Guillermo's family, his workers, and even the occasional traveler found peace there. But with Ayani's arrival, things began to feel different. Something was stirring in the air, something that made Don Guillermo uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that her presence was going to attract attention, and not just the kind of attention he wanted. The news spread quickly through the local community, as news like this often does. A woman, an Apache, found in the wild and brought to a settler's ranch. It wasn't the kind of thing that went unnoticed. At first, Don Guillermo tried to keep things quiet. He didn't want to stir up trouble, especially with tensions already high between settlers and the local Apache groups. But as the days passed, he could feel the eyes of the town turning toward his ranch, and he knew that it wouldn't be long before the matter was brought to the surface. One afternoon, as Don Guillermo was in the barn tending to the cattle, a group of men rode up to the ranch. They were on horseback, wearing dust-covered clothing and carrying rifles slung over their shoulders. The men were local ranchers, men who had been his neighbors for years. Don Guillermo knew them by name and had always thought of them as friends, but today there was an edge to their visit that he couldn't ignore. Guillermo, one of the men, Carlos, called out, his voice friendly but laced with concern. We need to talk. We heard you've got a woman from the Apache tribe staying here. What's going on, Guillermo? She was in bad shape, chained up and left to die. She's just recovering, that's all. We've been hearing rumors about Apache raids near here. Tensions are high, and you've got one of their people right here on your property. That's going to bring trouble, mark my words. That's all. He had made a promise to himself and to his family to do what was right, and helping Ayani was part of that. You're playing with fire, Guillermo, Carlos said, his tone cold now. I'm not saying you're a bad man, but you don't know what you're dealing with. The Apache won't forget that you've got one of theirs, and if they come for her, they'll come for all of us. He knew the risk was there, but he wasn't willing to betray someone in need. He had lived by a code of honor for his entire life, and he wasn't about to abandon it now. I'm not afraid of anyone, he said, his voice steady. If they come for her, they'll have to come through me first. but it was clear that they weren't going to change their minds. "We're just telling you, Guillermo," Carlos said. "If anything happens, don't say we didn't warn you." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Don Guillermo walked back toward the barn. His mind was in turmoil. The situation had become more complicated than he had imagined. Ayani was recovering, but now she was at the center of a growing conflict that she had no part in creating. The rancher knew that he had to be careful. The last thing he wanted was for the people he cared about to get caught in the middle of a war that wasn't theirs to fight. That evening, as Don Guillermo sat at the dinner table with Maria and the children, he couldn't shake the tension that had settled over the ranch. He tried to hide his concerns, not wanting to worry Maria, but she could sense something was wrong. Her gentle eyes studied him as she passed the bread, her gaze asking the question he wasn't ready to answer. After dinner, he went to the barn where Ayani was staying. She was sitting on the bench again, her face turned toward the window, staring out into the darkening landscape. Don Guillermo stood for a moment in the doorway, unsure of how to approach her. But something told him that now was the time to talk. "Ayani," he said quietly, stepping inside, "we need to talk." "I've been hearing things," Don Guillermo began. "People are worried about you being here. They're afraid of what might happen. They think your people might come for you and for them." He wasn't sure if it was fear, guilt, or something else entirely, but he could see the internal battle waging within her. "I never wanted to cause trouble," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted to bring danger to anyone. I just want to be safe. But I know that my people will come. They'll come for me." Yanni had lost everything, and now she was living in constant fear, not only of the people who had hurt her, but of her own people too. They would not forgive her for being among the settlers, and the settlers would never accept her as one of their own. "There has to be a way," Don Guillermo said softly. "A way where no one gets hurt. But right now, I don't know what that is. I'll do whatever I can to protect you, but I can't promise the world won't come knocking on our door. But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I made a promise." The days that followed were filled with a quiet kind of tension that hung in the air like the calm before a storm. The ranch, once a place of peace and routine, now seemed to be waiting for something to happen, something that neither Don Guillermo nor Ayani could control. The arrival of the group of ranchers, men who had warned him about the dangers of sheltering an Apache woman, had left a mark on his conscience. He had always been a man of honor, but now, with his family and his workers at risk, the burden of his decision weighed heavily on his shoulders. The rancher spent the next few days quietly observing the world around him. The land that had once seemed so familiar now felt different. The cattle grazed, the wind blew, the sun rose and set, but there was an underlying unease that wouldn't leave. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. Maria noticed the change in her husband. She could see the weight he was carrying, and she could hear it in the silence that had settled over their once lively home. At night, as they sat together in the warmth of their kitchen, she would ask him what was on his mind. And though Don Guillermo would say little, she knew he was troubled. He always was when it came to matters of honor, and this situation with Ayani was no exception. "I'm doing what I think is right," Don Guillermo said to her one evening after a long day of work. "But I can't shake the feeling that I'm putting us all in danger. I promised her that I would protect her, but I'm starting to wonder if I can." "I trust you." It was on the 5th day after the warning from the other ranchers that the tension finally broke. Don Guillermo had spent the morning repairing the fence near the south pasture, lost in his thoughts, when he heard the sound of hooves in the distance. At first, he didn't think much of it. But as the sound grew louder, he realized it was a group of riders, more than a few, and they were heading straight for his ranch. His heart raced. He had been expecting this moment, but that didn't make it any easier. He quickly made his way toward the barn where Ayani was resting. When he arrived, he found her standing by the door, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked, her voice trembling. Don Guillermo didn't answer right away. He walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I don't know who they are yet," he said, trying to sound calm, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "But we'll be ready for them. I won't let anyone harm you." The sound of the hooves grew louder, and Don Guillermo knew it wouldn't be long before the riders arrived. He took a deep breath and looked at Ayani one last time. "Stay here. I'll go see who it is." As he approached the edge of the property, he saw them, 4 men on horseback, moving quickly across the land toward him. As they got closer, Don Guillermo recognized them. They were the same group of ranchers who had warned him about the danger of sheltering Ayani. But this time, their faces were harder, their eyes more determined. He stood still, his arms crossed over his chest as they came to a stop in front of him. Carlos, the leader of the group, was the first to speak. "Guillermo," Carlos said, his voice firm, "you've been warned. We don't want any trouble, but you need to send her away. The Apache will be coming for her soon, and you'll bring nothing but danger down on us all. I'm not going to turn my back on her. They'll come for you, and they won't stop until they've had their vengeance." The other men were silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, unexpectedly, Ayani appeared from behind the barn. She walked slowly toward the group, her eyes focused on Carlos, her face set in a quiet resolve. Don Guillermo's heart skipped a beat when he saw her, but he didn't try to stop her. He knew this was something she had to do for herself. She stopped a few feet in front of the group, standing tall despite the chains that had once held her. She looked each of the men in the eye, her voice clear and steady. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," Ayani said, her voice strong. "I'm not asking for your protection, but I am asking you to leave this place in peace. I have been a prisoner for too long, and I will not be your prisoner again. I will not run from what has happened to me." Then she spoke again, her voice softer this time but filled with a quiet strength. "I understand better than you think," she said, "but I've already lost everything. I won't lose my dignity too." Finally, Carlos sighed and turned his horse away. "We'll leave," he said, his voice resigned. "But know this, Guillermo, we can't protect you from what's coming. If you choose to stand by her, you stand alone." "You're safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No one is going to take you from here." But for the first time, Don Guillermo felt that they had taken a step toward something better, a step toward peace. And though the future was still uncertain, he knew that together they could face whatever came next. The sun began to set, casting a warm golden light across the land. The ranch, still standing strong, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The world outside was unpredictable, but within these walls, Don Guillermo, Ayani, and the rest of his family could take comfort in one simple truth: they had each other. And sometimes that was enough.